while it's only amounted to maybe a couple minutes of actual driving time this year, I have gotten a lot of seat time relative to all my previous years. This car has been an absolute workhorse. And I will tell you what, it has given me the most challenging drive of my life. You can start with a Miata, you can start with spec cars. In fact, to show you I'm not a horrible driver, I took that little 40 Mazda and did teens at Streets of Willow. There's a core of a good driver in here. There's not the core of a good builder yet. This car has done everything in its possible power to make me work for my times. Every step of the way, I learned something more. So what we are going to embark on, this is another phase of this car, but it keeps getting better and better, using all of our building skills, all of our suspension understanding, all of our drivetrain understanding to make some insanely good times. This is one of the weirdest things that we've done to make our car faster, and it has to do with chilling out, stopping, slowing. And I'll show you what happens when you do it wrong. That is a flat spot. Why does a flat spot occur on a rear tire, first of all? Most of the time, you're doing a clockwise rotation around a track, meaning that you're always turning right. So the weight transfers to the left side. More weight, more friction, more grip, more slip. You get higher heat and higher stickiness on the outer tires. When you go to a straight line after doing tons of turns and you slam on the brakes, the tires that were your inside tires are now subjected to equal force that the outside tires are, and they can't grip as hard because they don't have as much heat in them. You have a problem with left to right, and even obviously front to rear as you go to big brake kits and so on. We have excellent, absolutely excellent wheel speed data, meaning all four tires tell me exactly how much they are or are not spinning based on the number of pulses per second or pulses per any unit of time. That is the core of an ABS system. This is from the company Continental. It is actually a competitive product to the current kind of gold standard in race applications, the Bosch unit, the RSX ABS. This is still extremely expensive, well over $7,000. If you think that's expensive, the Bosch system for the same almost basic setup is closer to $10,000. ABS can monitor when your tires start to slip and adjust brake pressure to each of your tires individually. That means you need a hydraulic unit manipulating all four wheels independently.
That's sick.
That is badass. It's smaller than I was expecting too. What does the ABS unit do? You press brake pressure in, and if there's a wheel slipping for whatever reason, it just now you're used to, and I'm used to, 2000 shipbox cars, my C5 Corvette. I went out of my way to get the ABS unit from the stock system working. Absolute trash. It was a These systems are so advanced you can almost barely feel it. And in fact, you have control over that. How does it know when a wheel is slipping? It's got an accelerometer, first of all. And so this thing has to be put in the very center of the car. So it can tell yaw, rotation, up, down, left, right, you name it, all of the G-forces. This thing is basically telling you, hey, I expect the car to start stopping. It doesn't tell you enough alone. So this is a pressure sensor. Do you know how pressure sensors work? I didn't. Pressure sensors don't measure pressure at all. There's very, very thin wire inside that orange thing. And that wire is so thin that when you stretch it or compress it, it changes how much resistance it gives. There's just a strain gauge inside of here that's measuring the bending of a roughly known piece of metal. The more it bends, the more pressure you have. The thinner it is, the lower pressure it can measure. One of the big things about this kit is placing it. Here are all the pins. So why are there so many wires on this if you only have one pressure sensor and a little 4-wire accelerometer? Well, that's because this thing takes way more sensors than just that. Now, Haltech doesn't have the features for this. This is brand new. So what are you doing here? Well, this unit has 12 different settings. In this case, they have 0 to positive and negative 6, or you can go 1 through 12. 1 through 12 is easier because the documents say 1 through 12. 6 of the settings are called analog, and 6 of the settings are digital. Basically, video game, or you still feel the end result of the braking. The more analog it is, the more you can feel, oh shit, that's too much pressure. Certain cars, you can undersize the brakes, so when you slam on the brakes at 100 miles an hour, you could get to the point where it doesn't even lock up the tires. That's where you'd use more of a digital setup or less user control. But when you have a car like this where it can lock up the brakes easily, you want the ABS system to have more control over it. Otherwise, you're gonna flat spot your tires before the ABS system can even do anything. I'm very familiar with this sort of setup. So it's technically serial to serial. This allows you to control this. You put in all of this configuration for the car, the weight, unsprung mass, all that sort of stuff. And so this thing knows what it's dealing with when it experiences wheel slip. The one major downside to this for the RX-7, traditional old school wheel speed sensors do not work with this, and nor should they. They're the style that basically has a little magnet, and the magnet creates positive and negative voltage. The stronger the metal gets near it, and faster the metal gets near it. We're gonna switch to like the Corvette wheel hubs, where it signals a on, off anytime a tooth is detected. Now the stock RX-7 has 44 teeth on its ABS tone ring, ABS ring. 44 pulses every full rotation of the tire, 26-inch tall tire. Basically, you come down to almost about 2 inches per pulse. This is only as good as data that it's getting in. It's got a really excellent accelerometer. You can actually put in steering angles, so it knows what the steering angle is trying to do through CAN bus here. I don't know if this unit works with this, but this is the type of unit that you would have. So that way the car knows the user has inputted a change or is holding it straight. Either way, they know that we are intending to do something. This system can make a smart decision. The devil is in the details, and it is all through this document. A couple of very key things about this kit. It does not require specific ABS sensors. The Bosch unit does. Now, it does require active ones. There are 3 levels of ABS wheel speed sensors: passive, active, and then active level 3. Level 3 can tell if you're going forward or reverse. Oh, look at this. It actually wants it on the rear. I have pressure sensors on front and rear, but this kit only requires 1. Here's what I'm going to talk to Haltech about, because they have it for the Bosch system. You can do all of this over CAN. That saves you tons of inputs on your Haltech. ABS pulsing is still slower than you at maximum grip, but ABS pulsing is better than any human realistically could ever be. So when you feel it pulsing, that means you're at your peak, but it means you're slightly past it because it feels a little bit of wheel slip. So you need to dial it back a little bit. And this is where it gets really wild. It's control strategy, corner braking to improve steering ability. So this is essentially torque vectoring. This is something a human being cannot do, which is control each of the wheels independently. You'd have to have 4 brake pedals. There's where you mount it, that's good to know. If they have an angle that they want you to mount it, that's also good to know. Pinouts, excellent. You build your own harness. So the money you didn't spend on the Bosch, you do get the option to basically build your own harness, which is much cleaner. The Bosch is awesome, but you can't even do the like mil-spec version until the higher level. So EBD is electronic brake distribution force, sensitive control of the rear axle to avoid overbraking in the rear during partial braking, overriding your balance bar. I'm gonna save you guys the time. I'm gonna go and stare at that engine bay, holding this in its correct orientation and going, how the hell am I gonna fit this in the car? Who knew that something so small multiplied over hundreds of thousands of times could be so damn complicated? But it is emotionally the longest full circle of cutting all of the old wire out of the through rotor. I'm talking not only all of my wire, but also all of the vehicle wire, because God knows what that's gonna do too, because that stuff's been just kind of scabbed in there, and I don't wanna fire. It's emotional, but it is time to cut all of the wire out of the car.
Hey, what's going on over there?
Joel, I think I'm stuck. Just wedged in here. Can you send help?
I got you.
The fuel system for the 4-rotor is twice as strong as the 3-rotors one. So we have some really upgraded pumps in there. We don't have time to upgrade the 3-rotors one, so we're just gonna literally take this one out, plop it in the back of the 3-rotors.
I wonder whose idea that was.
So when Ethan and I were talking, we had just some deep conversations about breaking the inside. Yeah, it was Joel's idea. Joel's a genius. My poor baby is about to rise again. But we have to upgrade the fuel system on this one anyway, so it's kind of a nice like trickle down. All the cars get twice as much fuel as they had before. This little guy is making me work for my money. My dream is that this fits somewhere in there. Now the problem is it's resting on the master cylinder for the clutch, which is not movable. This is doable. These hold signs have to go up. Even if 90 degrees, they still come up. That's too close to the surface of the sun. And this thing has to sit vertical like this. One of the things I think we will move to is raw mechanical brakes, like a Wilwood Master, where you just basically get rid of the vacuum here. That would make plenty more room. We have to plan where this goes, because all 4 brake lines that go to the other end, each 4 wheel wells, has to go from here to the wheel well. If we're gonna be making custom weird fit lines for the rest of the car, It's one and done. This is that phase where it's like a lot of staring at it, setting there, no, setting it there, no. And I think one of those things related to the actual build of the car is, I mean, look at all this shit. Shit shouldn't be there. We'll come back when we got the solution. Amazon had a killer deal for this. Our generator provides the power we need. It is extremely loud. We tried using the Lamborghini exhaust on it, and I still want to play with it quite a bit more, but it also doesn't have the right connector. I kind of ran out of time. So this is the quietest generator I could find, and it can run all of our laptops, everything else. Technically, the one that my dad got me is better from a peak power standpoint, but let's see if this one can do what that one can do, but much quieter. We have the laptops from Origin, and they are gaming laptops that actually end up doing some nasty bit of video rendering in CAD. We need to be able to charge them at the track, and that's really the whole reason for this. Still, this plastic, that's all sound damping. This was the same cost as the Predator, which is the one from Harbor Freight, but has way longer runtime, a couple decibels quieter, a couple more features. It does come without oil, so thankfully we just turned it over. 10W30. No. We're gonna go 0-40, so even wider range, colder starting. This generator doesn't even know what it's about to get. It's not even fair. We are going to fire it up in the shop. I know this creates carbon monoxide. It's a very quick test just to see, compared to all of our other sounds in the shop, how loud or quiet it is. That's pretty quiet. No power being used, 12 liters of fuel, 124 volts, and 21-hour runtime. Once we turn this eco mode on, it knows that there's no load right here, so it should calm the thing down. And then we'll plug the laptop in. I got my laptop waiting to go. So we'll turn on eco mode. With me talking like this, like at the table type of thing, it's competing for my voice, but as you can tell, this wouldn't bother many people. The laptop's not fully charged, so the laptop is currently on and running the battery. 240 watts. It doesn't sound any different other than the laptop chugging on top of it. Yeah, so 250 watts right there. And this thing essentially doesn't sound any different. Lean this right here for sound, like we're on the other side of the wall.
Better. That's not bad at all.
No, that's not bad at all.
Being outside makes a big difference.
Yeah, let's go out there. It's so much different.
Without it echoing?
Yeah, without it echoing. It's. I'm not annoying anybody. We got full power, so we can have heat and cooling inside the thing, so we can stay mentally like A game, just being more fresh for the adventures that await. So this is a massive game changer. And thanks to my dad for like making this initially possible. Let's see. There. That's so sick. Cool. This is our chance to finally get the core parts of the engine bay done all at once. We never have enough time, but I think this is a good time frame. So we're actually going to finally be removing one of my favorite features of the stock car, which is the brake booster, the vacuum thing here. Most race cars do not have those. That's more for comfort. The vacuum inside there's this big diaphragm, and so that's basically tons of surface area that when you press the brakes, it provides an extra amount of push on the pedal. When you don't have that, it almost feels like you're trying to grab the brake disc yourself with the pedal. It's a very different feel. It takes a little bit to get used to.
You have to be strong. Your legs are like, you're not just, pressing the brake. You're stomping on that thing.
Mm-hmm. Positive side is that gives you way more linear feeling. We have our old Willwood setup, not even old, we just bought it forever ago. This gives us another feature that we should have with this car, which is the balancing bar here. That will give us more or less brake pressure to the front or rear, also calculated by the two master cylinders here. We're cheating with the ABS because the ABS can say, hey, I see that you're putting more or less pressure to the front or rear, and it will stop one or the other, and it'll basically override it. The neat part is we'll be able to look at the logs and manually adjust this more by looking at what the ABS does. You could buy a big brake kit for your car, don't even give a shit about any of this, and the ABS system will just give you maximum to all four wheels. It is Joel's favorite part of the series, and that is wiring. Every time, I love it. It gets me a hard on when I know that Joel has to come over to this corner. This beautiful wiring. Now this is a little atrocious because I'm actually doing it half-assed properly. It's the weirdest thing ever. So what I'm doing, they're not properly sitting, and I could kind of go through there and use 100 zip ties. I'm just getting them roughly wound around it, all in the right order, And then I'm going through with this Kevlar wrap, and it's tightening them all up and causing them to fall in line. So I am, in fact, half-assing it, but this is the sort of stuff I feel more comfortable with. So I'm using a little bit more Kevlar, and it'll be even more flexible. Now this little baby line here, which is basically the same size as like a 8-gauge wire, is everything to the rear of the car. So what's inside of here are 2 fuel pumps right there. Left turn signal, right turn signal, reverse, brakes, and running lights. This is CAN bus if I want to send something to the back of the car. Ground, fuel level sensor, shut off, and then 5 volts. The other thing I've been working on with that is active wheel speed sensors. So you RX-7 guys, my buddy Neil sent me these in exchange for sexual favors. These are out of a BMW E46. Even though these are only 2 wires, they are in fact active sensors. With everything the guys are doing, under the dash is going to be a safe zone, meaning no fires. So Isaiah keeps raving about his coochie couch, so I decided to one-up him with a penis pillow. You know it's legit when it sounds like a kid's name, Zubelieves.
I didn't even realize that was a Z.
Yeah? We're sleeping in the trailer.
Cots didn't work out, right?
Yeah, cots didn't work. It was a good first attempt, but you can't really have 2 men sleep in the same cot. It just doesn't feel right. That's why these are nice, that they actually link together.
How long do you think you've been doing that?
Under 5 minutes.
Yeah.
Definitely. It's been like a minute and a half.
There you go. That's actually pretty.
Is it better than the cot?
Shoulder-wise, fuck yeah. I saved Joel the headache of me narrating every single step because it's at this point, some of these things are kind of our bread and butter. So I went and made and labeled front end of this. So rear lights, fuel pumps, and then the power line. And so this purposely has the female connectors because I bought a little bag of these. What'll happen is down by the passenger's foot, these 2 will be clicked into place, and so the rear harness is basically part of the car. So this is one of my longest runs. That was terrifying to do, actually. This ground is specific to the fuel pumps. It's actually going to the battery. Even though we could ground it to the chassis, visually, I just want this to go straight to the battery and no worries there. So the rear harness is done. I also bought pass-throughs.
Fancy.
Now I'm not going to use this one on this car because ground doesn't need to be isolated. I did do this with the power side. There it is right there. We ended up doing this on the Dodge. It works so well isolating the power like this, and then we'll have like a ground line to the block, to the ECU, to the battery. The interesting thing about ground most people do not realize is that ground is equally part of the party as power. Remember, the alternator is just sitting up here, grounded to the block, and all it's doing is creating a massive difference of energy. You can't have the party without one or the other. So just because you have the alternator power line running to here, the alternator is being grounded through the block, and it goes where? So when you ground the block to the chassis or to your battery, that's actually 100% of the alternator going through that. And we want to keep it close to the power line because the 2 kind of cancel each other out. We'll have the alternator run up to this, and then the battery run up to this, and then the starter run up to this. It's got plenty of thread to run all 3. That is isolated. And then on the inside, we'll have the PD16, the R3, and my random fuse box, and that's a pretty damn clean setup. Joel was asking about my ECU mount, and it's actually Ethan's mount for me. We have probably the cleanest looking R3 and PD16 setup known to man. That is both of them. You only see one, but that is actually
no way. I didn't realize.
Yeah, the PD16 is on the back side. It's in there tighter, tons of room to pass behind it, so it's not interfering with anything. And then that allows me to run all the power lines over to my power stud. The reason we didn't put it where I really wanted it originally, above the passenger's feet, is because we might be cutting that area out, particularly for the dry sump system.
This is one of the options we have for the forwarder that Rob had laying around. There's all these holes and opening stuff on the firewall. So I have that all cleaned up. I made this pretty thick box right here. This is going to be welded into the cart. Then I have this seal-locking nuts at the top, so that way when you tighten these in from the bottom, from the inside of the car, it's honestly not a big deal. These pedals don't have flex because the forwarder ones have just the slightest bit of flex just because of the way they made them out. There's going to be a lot of open space and whatnot behind when I weld this on, so I want that to be primer so that way it doesn't rust out.
when I last saw you, Joel was a single man. So Joel is now
Hey.
married. Yeah, congratulations.
Thank you.
It was a really cool wedding. I pulled the mil-spec harness that I made. This is my very first one out of the car. Cleaned it off. Having it all sealed is a godsend. I just wiped it down. I didn't even like wash it off, but you could. I cut the harness back here. This was originally wired for the fuel tank, and so it had this excess length to get to the dash, which is a pretty useful feature, honestly, what the fuel tank does. But that is now just an absolute mess under the dashboard of the car. What I'm going to do is take what the guys from Haltech did in the parking lot and make it even better. And they did a damn good job, given the fact that it was midnight at a track. This all get cut back to about here. This goes away. This is the core of the power of the car. Behind the ECU and the PDM and the other fuse box, there's gonna be this little knot right here, and then these will go and plug into all the power there. So you see these really big wires? That's like spall fan, water pump. Headlights, turn signals, pop-ups, pop-downs, running lights, high beams, and so on, all right in there. And then over here, fuel pump, lift pump controls, tail lights, brake lights, reverse. So this is going to be a pretty nasty high current environment. And then this one, which is another one I'm very, very proud of, this is going to be sitting at the steering column, the original drive-by-wire pedal. The dash, IC7, as many of you guys may know, or some of you might not, has a 0.5 gig logger built in. You can use the inputs as inputs on your computer. They haven't released the update yet for it, but it's been in there the whole time. I have all of the button controls for the key on, accessories, starter, all of the stock controls are all here too. And then that will go down behind the center of the car. Really, really pleased with this. The car retains and gains more functionality than it's ever had. This little guy right here, hidden inside of this, I was posting it on Instagram, got the pin length and then made the resistor the right length so it sat inside of here. Each of these 4 wires have their own resistor to ground. It's called pull down to ground instead of pull ups. The orange wire is going to be the 8-volt signal. So this is active ABS sensors. I have an older video on the 4-rotor where we hacked C7 Corvette's wheel hubs and we're able to get an active on-off signal. Here are the stock FD wheel speed sensors. These are both the same style. They are 2-wire and they are magnetic, heavily magnetic. The force of the magnet is what generates a sine wave. So it's just woo, woo, woo. This is a traditional old style called VR, variable reluctor, you'll hear all those different names. It's very susceptible to electromagnetic interference. That's why you run the shielded wires. If you run a magnet over here, it's almost the same as running a magnet there. The ECU has to try and filter that out. This one on the rear tends to look at the wheel like this. This, on the other hand, goes into the side and the wheel passes by like this. It doesn't matter the polarity here. We're gonna go ahead and look at millivolts. As I even pull it off of the metal table, you can see it generating electricity. When a tooth comes by, it doesn't even have to touch it. You can see positive and negative voltage. It's a very wild signal, and the faster it goes, the bigger the voltage goes up and down. That sadly won't work with the new ABS system, even though we filtered it and got great data. That's where these sensors come in. Now, it is also a magnet in there. Fronts are directional, so they're both off by a part number. You can see they're flipped. If you put them in the same way, one's reading from the top, one's reading from the bottom. So left and right matters on the front. This is really intimidating because you're thinking that there's maybe some hardware in here. It's all in the sensor. Just cut this right off. 2 wires here, 2 wires here. So you'd think that it does the same thing as the other sensors. If you do this with the sensor, it doesn't read shit. This is the least documented thing in the world. All the companies that make these make them for OEM companies, and they don't provide documentation. They don't even really put their own name on it. We got donuts all across the board. You'd think, oh, bad wheel speed sensor. It's not. So we're gonna bust out one of these. This is 220 ohms. That's how much resistance that this thing gives. If you're not familiar with that concept, you don't need to know it right now because you can kind of copy what I'm doing. But when you have problems, you're going to need to understand what you're doing. The easiest way to make sure that you've got what you got, switch this to resistance. Hell yeah. I spent a couple extra dollars and got these slightly nicer ones that are like plus or minus 1%. So they're pretty much close to accurate. You don't need exactly 220, but 220 is kind of right in the middle. We're going to go ahead and use one of our smaller anti-gravity setups. Take this sensor, we got 12 volts going to that side, ground on this side. You can see from these two, 11.6 volts. That's all I'm measuring right now. We're going to take this one off of the 12 volts, and we're actually measuring across the resistor, which sounds really confusing, and 0 volts because it's no difference. But then watch what happens when I plug this in. 1.6 volts. And then when I start putting metal in front of this piece right here, look at that, 3 to 1.6.
Wow.
So that's a high and low signal right there. It's that simple. And this meter can't update quick enough to show you the up, down pulses. That's it. It stays at a solid low and a solid high, but neither of them are 0 volts or 12 volts, so you can recognize that, hey, it's working properly. That's a digital signal. Black wire is the signal wire, and it's being pulled down to ground. When the sensor's on, it bounces up to 1.5 volts, and then when it sees a high, it goes up to 3 volts and back and forth. So that's what we're going to do, put digital signals on this, because now every single tooth will produce a pulse for the ABS system to use. To get these sensors, the BMW sensors, to work on a FD, they have to be rotated slightly. They don't fit exactly. And they have to be spaced backwards to get the sensor in the same distance. That's what these are. A friend of mine knew a guy that was making them, and so I kind of called in a favor there. And so the sensor bolts into this, and then this bolts into the FD. I had to kind of crush it on there a little bit. That's the mounting surface, and then the trigger wheel for this is inside there. And so it's a really tight fit, which I want, just to have that somewhere in that area. That should do it. Since we're not going to be able to get the dry sump system in time, we're just going to reuse everything. Ethan has just put red Loctite all over that oil pressure regulator, but this is the only bearing I just felt not right reusing. It would work, but I don't need it to lock up in the middle of Laguna. We just need to get one more vent out of it, but I don't want to catastrophically blow up the motor. E&J makes this real nice bearing pusher. That screws right there. It's on the opposite side of the oil inlet. Just kind of line it up like that, and then press that in until the cap hits that lip, and you're done. That's my favorite part about this thing. Done right, it just pops right off. It's not misaligned at all. It's such a funny idea that it's like, please don't rotate.
It's like a self-tapper holding it.
Yeah, it really is. Yeah, it's the best way to put it. We'll tear this motor down to do all the cool like upgrades for it, but I'm curious to see if that little tip of that stud is still in the center of the bearing. If the bearing shifts to the side, even if it doesn't spin, does it slowly get suggested to spin? Yeah, that bearing looks pretty damn tight. It would suck if we spin the bearing because it's too tight of a bearing now and everything else is all loose. In theory, you could do that. If you have one bearing different tolerance than all the other bearings, the rest of the motor's loose, it'll always favor a side. It's basically just like spinning against an edge. This is a gross over exaggeration, but it could be spinning off the top side, bottom side, side. It always favors a side. Here's where it gets interesting to do this way. There's a taper on this, and that's supposed to go towards the motor for some reason. So this is blown motor instantly until you do this, and we have to be very, very careful right now. Full disclosure, we are putting this bearing back in. It's got some score marks, but still all in the money. You can see a little bit of wear on the rear of the E-shaft as well. So useful. This is the last time you'll see this. All the little splices for vehicle CAN, Haltech CAN bus, power splices, other power splices, 5-volt splices. This is all for the body of the car. You know it's good when it doesn't look like a lot of work. It's like, oh yeah, easy. But that was a pain in the ass. While we're in this phase of the wiring, you have to think about the ABS system in here. These 4 wires right here, 4 tires, 4 wires. So that's going to the computer. This and the 4 wheels go to about here. Now I can connect these directly, ignore the whole Continental or Bosch ABS system type of thing, or I can make a little separate harness that connects between these two, steals the power and ground from this one, steals the data from these, and goes to the Continental system. So that is kind of the way I'm solving this right now. Unfortunately, when it comes to a motorsports ABS unit in general, you have this problem of like, well, I can get the data through the CAN bus or from the actual wires themselves. If we trusted just the CAN bus, but these wires could be used for something else, which is why I made this that way. This connector could be used for 4 more inputs. I have got a whole harness planned for the Continental. It's a pain in the ass, and it'll connect to about 6 things out of this harness. So these are for the wheel speed sensors, and then the full-blown ABS is a whole nother connector. So we'll go over that once I have that wired in as well.
When you're doing a bunch of mounting things, you need to kind of have foresight because everything needs to work together and look nice. These connectors are normally like fat connectors to get for the ABS unit because there's a bunch of wires going into them. So having the space over here was pretty tough. And then up here, when you bend a brake line full 180, it's like about 2 to 2.5 inches depending on how much straight you're able to do on whatever flare you have. So I ended up deciding I'm gonna do 90s on these so that way everything comes in straight, keeps it low profile. There's this bend down here that I had to cut this open to make this fit flat. They only give you 3 holes on the block of this. On the opposite side, there's 2 holes right here and 1 weirdly kind of sized hole. So I had to weld spacers in there. It just became super complicated. But it's in there now and it looks nice. We have all the right cylinders, so I could take this off with little to no issue.
Nice.
It was a wrestling video game for, I think, Super Nintendo. You could make your guy do this over and over again, which meant something when you're my age. My guy would just keep doing this in circles and I get my ass beat. It was the funniest thing ever. The other guy would knock you out. Anyway, that's what this wiring harness did to me. You can see that the heat shrink's not even shrunk. That's a massive knot. But then again, look at how actually small that is. That's the whole vehicle right there. This goes to the PDM. These 2 go to the ECU. This is spare inputs. No clue what that is. This is all the like data. This is all the power. And so some of these do actually crisscross like I showed you earlier. I think I'm going to end tonight with putting a little bow on here. I just need to know if it'll get past this area right here. I feel so confident. I'm actually going to trim this. I should heat shrink it down, but no. It's not looking good.
Yeah. No, there's no way.
Yeah, oh yeah, there is.
Oh god.
There is. There is.
I've never seen that technique before.
It's the force. Oh, look at that. It's leaving tons of shit all over. That's why it's letting it. There's like some powder on there. No fucking way this might work.
Why do you have to
now. I really thought about actually doing this properly and sealing it with the epoxy on the inside, but this is inside the car, and time is not my friend, so we're just going to go ahead and let it hold everything together.
The sheathing part is like kind of the reward for the wiring.
Yeah, like Joel just said, it's a nice reward for whatever shit is going on inside of there. And the problem with Haltech, or any PDU for that matter, is that you can put everything in one spot, resulting in weird harnesses like this if you're trying to separate power from the data. So you can see, I sadly had to cut this open for 1 wire, but I'll glue that back in and do it right. So this is all computer stuff, power, data, everything. Every single wire being used. But we're gonna put this in for the first time. I'm in for the wild, most holy night of my life. I need to drill a 2.5-inch hole for that grommet, but the problem is I don't have a center hole because I already have an existing 1-inch hole. So we're gonna.
Want me to show you the trick?
The trick that I have used that actually does work is you go really fast, and then you just have 4 arms of steel and just hold it so it doesn't buck.
Let's see if it seems off center. It's not bad. It'll self center.
I'm gonna go fast and hard. This should be gratifying.
You guys know how I said on my bracket, I had to bring it down because the line going up would be too tall and it would hit the hood. Went to go buy whatever fittings to figure it out. there's nothing I could do that goes 90. So I thought these were just all the same size. This is M12, this is M10, M12, M10. So these two bigger ones are gonna be front, and then two of them are gonna be rear. And you have your in and your out. Best thing I have is this, but then with that and a bend, that's way too tall. This is pretty much the hood right here. Well, that wouldn't fit. So luckily they had these fittings for the M10, but the M12 banjo was way too big, and there's only so much surface area right here. We weren't comfortable putting the big banjo on there, so I chopped off this part of that, which is this. So I'm gonna drill into this just a little bit so I could chop this thread back, and so I could put that onto there and weld it so I could have a steel 90 fitting, and that way the line comes in right here. It's very low pro, it's very nice. You just gotta be crafty sometimes. I wanna put this in and never touch it ever again. This is the size of the bend off of the little bender that I have, but this is too much. It's just not good enough. Normal bend, my bend, it saves you about like an inch. You just put this guy in there. A little candy cane.
Ooh. I thought brake line was way harder to bend.
They are, it doesn't make it look easy.
Just that strong.
Yeah, I'm hanging out with Rob.
It's hard to believe that this is what we like dream of doing. Many of you in your own garage would put yourself in weird contorted positions because it's fun. And I got all the wires for the dash, the pedal, the steering column right here, all ran to length, which is oddly enough almost exactly the lengths that I set. I'm gonna label them now. I wish I'd done this outside of the car, but we needed the dash in, we needed this all in. Time is of the essence. Once I wire these two in, dash and keys, I could start getting ready to do the final power and maybe
Fronts are done. Now it's the hard part of rears. Installing them is actually pretty tough. I like them because they are challenging, but I also don't like them because they are challenging.
I am doing the one thing that you would never expect me to do right now, and that is solder. That is because of this little sensor amplifier right here. I had to do some work on it. There are 4 inputs, and they go to the shifter right here that I've glued onto there. The middle 2 go to each other, and the outer 2 go to each other, and that can measure strain in a couple different ways. That little knob right there is the gain, and we'll play with that particularly. But right now what I'm doing is I'm taking off the weird connectors for ground, 5 volts and out, and I'm wiring that in to more stout 22 gauge wires. It feels weird that these are the big wires. On top of all of that, I'm going to take what will be a 3-pin connector and then kind of put that onto this, something to that effect. I'll have this going to the strain gauge and then this going to the ECU. One of the biggest problems we've had with the oiling system on our cars is that, other than the 4-rotor, we run 2 oil coolers. We run them in series. So what happens is it goes through one, goes through the second one, and then comes back, which means ultra cool oil, right? That's a bad idea. Ignore the first one for a second. Second one gets medium temperature oil and cools it down. Say this one gets it nice and cold the way you want it. Well, that colder oil is thicker. What's that gonna do to the pressure going through the front one? You've just created back pressure to the oil system instead of having them both equally doing the same amount. So instead of series, we're running this car in parallel. My goal initially is that where oil pressure comes in, even though liquid doesn't compress, it is still easier for it to go straight. So my hope is that this favors going to the further one, which will even out the flow. Realistically, I think this one's gonna be hotter, but I don't know. And the cool part is that we can just put a little bit of a restriction in this fitting right here to reduce the flow prioritization to this one. Now this engine has twice the route that it can go, and then we have less back pressure in the oiling system.
Apparently the balls are loose on our tow hitch, so I've been tasked with tightening because I got the big family wrench. So it was fairly loose, but I'm gonna go ahead and loosen it, and then I'm gonna red Loctite the shit out of it, and I'm gonna tighten the shit out of it, and then whenever I think about it again.
This has been sitting at my feet for a while now. This is the original 4-rotor harness, but I've been using it for the 3-rotor. It's driven me nuts because I've learned a lot. That is the exact same gauge of wire. It's actually more ground. Another really beautiful thing about this setup is that these little boots, I'll be able to service that for some reason if I needed to. So much less, so much lighter. No more exposed wires. That's my thing for that engine bay. All of this has led to this moment, which is wiring the ABS. Having the core of the car wired was very critical because there's so many unique things to the ABS system. I didn't want to put shit on top of shit. So it starts with a very bulky, but familiar bulky for ABS systems, connector. So it's got this like 2-parter and it feels very OEM. And then once it goes down, it locks into place. This will be sitting in the engine bay. I don't know if the wires are going to go out this way though, because there's a cylinder right there. Let's take a look at that. So this connector is definitely a pretty complex one. You can see that right there locks all the pins into place by design. It prevents you from actually closing it without those locks. We're gonna go down instead of across to deal with the fact that this is not an externally sealed connector. Internally it's sealed, not a big deal. Here's all 3 cylinders. It's gonna run from the connector down under that, come up, ground to the main ground stud there, come back up, go into the engine bay, and then go over to the fuse box, power from the fuse box, but it's got a lot of other things going on. The Haltech's little clicker, brake pressure sensor, it's got to connect into the wheel speed sensors and so on. So we've got a lot of different things to interface with, even having the ECU be able to disable the system. And finally, my least favorite thing is using 9-pin serial, have an interface for this to connect to the laptop. What I'm going to do right now is draw out the harness and then show you what I've got. There's 2 major connections, as in splices, here outside and here right past the firewall. So I'm gonna start from this connector, and I'm actually going to pin the connector with these long ass wires and then work my way backwards. Now the one weird thing that I'm gonna be doing here, so all 4 wheels are coming through here, but power for them and also being able to read them is coming from over here from the ECU. So I have to splice the active wheel speed sensors accordingly. With all of this figured out, I now know I have to pull and get ready all of these wires. Number the thickness, the color, and then the length. I've gone through it twice, and it makes sure that I have all those weird things that are going on where it's like, you know what, let me splice this in to save the connector. I'm gonna start pulling all these wires. I might as well just start terminating them to this connector. That's why I have to make sure certain ones are gonna get crimped and shared. And so, but you'll see this come together kind of quickly from the very base of the rat tail, and then go off into God knows what. That makes up the very core of the power harness. These are actually like a foot too long, but we need to make sure we're avoiding oil and especially brake fluid itself. Very corrosive, nasty shit. Just is the beginning of this. If you guys don't already know from all the wiring videos, blow through tons of these and it makes your life so much simpler. Because yes, there are more wires, but I'm keeping track of the beginning. There you have it, the core of this wild ass harness. These wires there are actually going to kind of V. They're going to go from back here through to here and come back. The only reason I'm not attaching them right now is because I'm going to sheathe and I don't want to have tons of shit at one end and then try and get the DR25 over it when I'm going to be terminating all these. So I'm going to start by terminating all these wires, and I got a couple splices to do. I'm going to cut back most of these zip ties on the front end, sort them and pin them into the connector. Start with the obvious ones. Power 1 and 45. That's satisfying. Okay. Then ground 14 and 58. There. That's 22. We're going to go to 23, which is the signal wire, so it should be this next one over. And this top piece just guides it. It's actually pretty nice. And then you go through the next part, and once we lock it, they stay in, but you can actually pull it back. Those two are good. Ground is 29. Wildly enough, the sensors don't share sensor, ground, and signal. They have 3 wires specifically for 2 different 5-volt sensors. Pin 53 is power. Blue wire is pretty important. This one disables the whole thing. That way we'll have a button on the Haltech keypad. Even though these are active ABS sensors, it wants me to have 4 ground lines. And I wasn't sure what they go to, or if they were just signal like cleanup or whatever, but it does actually say in the manual it wants to twist the signal wire with the ground wire as kind of a shield. Which if I knew that, I would have just ran shielded wires. I'm gonna have a shit ton of twisted pairs, but the black and white ones will be easy to distinguish from CAN bus. This is the most important part coming up. Signal wire for right rear tire is 11. Signal wire for front left tire is 9. Rear left tire is 7. And signal wire for front right is 5. Hopefully their grounds are right next to each other, because then that really makes this easy. These two are special. One's a ABS warning and the other one's a ABS failure. It's basically the same thing to me. Okay. That's a mess, but that is my mess. Make sure all these wires map out. We're basically good to start rough twisting this. That's how small the harness is going to be. On the bigger wires, there's not really a need to give them a service loop. There's not really much room to do that. But on the smaller wires, we could do that. I think time kind of says otherwise. I'm going to make it to this knot right here and then sheathe this section. You try to get the biggest piece of Raychem or sheathing that fits this. Now this is massive, but it's 3/4, which means it'll shrink down to 3/8, so half that size. And 3/8 is smaller than 0.4 inches. Being that this is the closest to our SEMA push, I could not sleep last night. I was working, trying to stay a couple steps ahead of the guys. Nice, clean, all labeled. I'm very happy with this.
It's a lot smaller than I thought it would.
It really is. My brake pressure and the grounds are all cleaned up, and right inside of here is that splice. Remember those 2 white wires that I had, that one that was extra long? I spliced those 2 signals. One goes to the ABS, one comes through here, loops, and then goes out to the Haltech for now. The outside of it is all clean, then it's gonna pass through the firewall around here. So I put it in the car and got them to the correct lengths. The reason why I did that now is, unfortunately, I'm not gonna be able to terminate these out here. I'm gonna have to do this upside down, backwards, and so on. A little G-force box. This goes to the Haltech. This goes to where all the wheel speeds on the whole car. Power. A little knob, more connections to like the vehicle CAN bus and all that. I was gonna use Autosport connectors. I left a little bit of length for that as well. It's a lot easier to put on because it like slips that connector up.
Well, it's not Rob's birthday yet, but I had to bring him something, so.
Yeah, this is sick.
G&J had these guys laying around, and G&J is a local thing. They do aircraft stuff, and these are for a jet engine. This should be Inconel shielding, and this is perfect for like a downpipe. It has the safety wire spots and whatever, so we'll make this useful to us.
Yeah, definitely. The heat from the exhaust and all that is heating the engine.
Well, it is a jet engine thing, so
We're a jet engine car. In the sake of time, I took this little box, held it in there, it's all safe and secure inside of this, and then I added a 240 ohm resistor to fake both sides of the resistance for this CAN bus in a hurry to get the thing on. So I just powered on for the very first time. First of all, I clicked connect, so just to show you the disconnect and the connect, all this information started coming in, and I was all excited. The very first thing I did was went to diagnostics, and it's got tons of errors. None of the wheel speed sensors are in, pressure sensors not calibrated, latitude, longitude is not calibrated, and tons of other ones I don't even understand. They're starting to do the bleeding, and this system has a whole bleeding process. So they're doing the basic bleeding, traditional majority of the air out of the system as they can. Then you go and do the ABS bleeding. So I had to make sure this would work in time, but watch this. And they're about to pump the brakes, and you'll actually see it. Okay, there you go. So now, see how he's pumping it right now? So what's neat is that the front one is being read from inside the unit. Brake pressure sensor is working without us configuring it. So it's plugged in and grounded and all that, and it's actively working. So you can see both front and rear pressures are coming online. So that's the very first step. Next step will be doing the full bleed, and then at least there the car can be driven. I've got to hot wire the wheel sensors in, and then I don't know how to calibrate the latitude sensor, and I got that plugged in, but I'll probably have to put a 240 resistor on that as well. Front brake circuit, it's getting 56% of the brake pressure. It's actively working. It is 7 o'clock on Thursday. Our goal was to be leaving 3-4 hours ago. This is the nature of trying to do so much at the last second. I'm frustrated but determined. I think we got a cool plan of attack for what we're gonna do. At the end of the day, all that matters is having an insane four-rotor, upshifting and downshifting like absolutely insane. Yeah, whatever. Which car I really want there. Flat shifting like crazy. ABS, all of it working. I don't like the idea of having something in the back of your head that is like, from a builder standpoint, you're doing wrong. I want to go out there and be a driver. I've chosen to take a knee. Let's work on the car for another 6 to 8 hours. So we're gonna go midnight to whatever, load the car up, and then drive overnight, and then show up at the event the next day. I'm not driving. I'll be loopy. Some of the stuff I'm gonna say is not gonna make full sense. I'm gonna make Joel leave it in there. I don't want to just like half-ass everything, and then it works half-ass on the track, and I hate that type of video. Did a mental reset, and I'm excited to see all this stuff come together. The car is so damn solid. I don't want the opinion of rushing make you think that the car isn't solid. It's just the core of the car is working really well with all the wiring. of the things we learned while tracking the C5 is that it stayed way cooler than this car. And of course, 2-rotor versus 3-rotor, but at the end of the day, thermodynamics roughly in mind, power is power, heat is a byproduct of that, and engines are just the same efficiencies. One of the biggest things we did on the rotary vet is that we actually had it where intercooler is only 2/3 of the radiator. So we said, let's allow air to go over that 1/3 straight to it. Intercooler was stay ice cold, and the fans could pull through that. We're gonna have to grab a piece of paper because it's insane how much air pulls through this new duct we've made. Instead of forcing all the air to go through this, we're gonna allow the ramming of the air to go through this a lot, and then that high pressure zone will also go up and over into that top quarter of the radiator, but we'll show you that with the fans. So, look at that. So I got that plus. A properly designed cooling system, everybody says, and I agree, shouldn't really need to use the fans at speed. Well, that's kind of what we're simulating in reverse, is that we're assuming that the front high pressure air zone is going to go to both, not just skip the intercooler. And so we'll check with our intercooler temps, but we've always had super cold intercooler temps, except on the 4-rotor, and we're over spooling the turbo like 20,000 RPM. But I think that this is going to really make a massive difference on cooling the monster.
What's your name?
That's a wild looking cat. I like orange cats. The ears are dirty as shit. Yeah, this is probably my finest harness ever, and it's not auto sports. It could be eventually, but it's not. This is left area, this is right area, headlights, pop-ups, coolers, turn signals, running lights. It's sealed. I glued the shit out of this thing all the way through here. Every one of these connectors are glued, sealed in. I even made this one even better. Angled for the way I wanted it, and we can finally put it in, connect it all up. Aside from me just chilling, I want to show you guys something that we finally installed. Not only do we have a nice little special circuit for the cigarette lighter, so I can roll those blunts, is I got the 3D printed dash. It's so much better than that little thing that they made work as it's supposed to through the center of the steering wheel. Continental covering their asses. They don't give you the firmware until you've got it working to the point where you can load in the firmware. You, the user, can mess up so much. They kind of like make sure that you at least are doing the basics before you get the latest firmware. So I'm gonna set in like rear wheel drive, gearbox, tire circumference, wheel speed sensors. I just have not direction sensing level 2. Connectors facing the front of the vehicle on that IMU thing. I don't have my steering angle sensor. And so we'll go ahead and write all of these new things. Here's what else is really cool. You put in the weight over the front, over the rear, the wheelbase, the track width rear, center of gravity, number of teeth on the ABS sensors, and it knows how to really handle the car way better than I could. So it's got torque vectoring and braking. I'm gonna play with it a little bit more before I tell you more about it, because this is my first time digging into this system. Release, wait. Press and hold it for 2 seconds. Let go. Press and hold for 2 seconds. Yeah. Okay, let go. 2 more seconds. Hold it for 3 seconds. Okay. Okay, let go. Release and wait. Yeah, it's bleeding.
What the heck? That's crazy.
I'm sitting in here doing this. Okay. Let's see. So bleeding units off, screws closed. Currently, it's live updating. 56% front, 42% rear, and it's, look at each of the ones individually as well, because they're all 4 getting different brake pressure. So 42 bar here, 35 bar here. It can now individually control each of the tires. Really impressively straightforward once you get the firmware. What type of calipers do you have? Are they fixed or sliding calipers? How's the caliper stiffness? We'll just say medium. Brake coefficient. That's pretty sick, which I don't know. But we can estimate it by the radius of the disc with the piston area and the friction and all that. The little IMU, which is the G-force sensor, we have it centered laterally, side to side, but we need to measure how far from the front axles it is. Like that sort of information is incredible that it needs to know all that. What we need to do now is see if the wheel speed sensors work on it. I can't even take a fake hit. The Takis. It's midnight, and we're all a little loopy. A lot of good, a lot of weird. Right now, the ABS system is fully operational. It's like the Death Star, and you know how that ends. Only downside for it is a very big downside. It will not share data with the Haltech at this moment. Try new things, it bites me in the ass. So the Haltech eventually have all that through the CAN bus, so we won't need this problem at all. But we somehow need to tell the Haltech how fast we're going because we have boost by gear, which is a very big problem if we don't have boost by gear. Just general speed and shifting and all that sort of stuff. So we gained stopping and we lost going. I'm gonna try and come up with another solution. I have Haltech's GPS sensor. So we'd have that to at least give me a speedometer, because I don't even have a speedometer right now. I got an idea. There's a tach output on the ABS unit for tachometer. But I could use that as a very accurate source of speed. I'm gonna investigate that, because at least that might be a single signal to send over to the Haltech that is brutally accurate. Okay, I got some work to do. This has been a long time coming. We had a video maybe about a year ago where I was coming down the street and just slammed on the brakes and it locked up like both the fronts, and it was absolutely atrocious. I flat spotted the tires at the time. So we're gonna recreate that experiment. I'm gonna come back down that road, haul ass, and then slam on the brakes and see if we can see any difference or if they'll lock up. That said, she's pretty dialed in right now, so I hope we don't repeat what we did before. I even tried accelerating harder to get up to speed higher than I did previously, because I waited for all the cars and made sure it was all safe. But I hauled ass and slammed on the brakes, and you see what happened? I stopped way too soon.
That was a little too uneventful. That was...
Yeah, you could feel, I don't know if you could hear it from the outside, but all the tires were pulsing. I could feel it, and it stopped so...
on a dime.
Yeah, it stopped as much as it could. Literally, those wheels not heated up, shitty normal street road, and that is completely the opposite of this. That's nuts. That is just incredible. I got a lot of other things to deal with on this car, but now braking at the very last second is no longer any of my concern.